I think we've talked a lot about the previous storm events in 2021. The City of Waco prepared an after-action report after Winter Storm Uri and developed a plan to improve and optimize our responses to the event and maintain essential city resources during emergency events such as winter storms. We've talked a lot about water and wastewater and things we do in fleet at Waco. We do everything but water and wastewater, but we still maintain a fleet of generators that support a lot of critical city operations, along with the water and water utilities department that support their own generator systems and all. One of the things that we did through our after-action process is we identified some additional opportunities to enhance resiliency and maintain operational continuity for other critical facilities. And if you are from a city, it's not just water and wastewater. There's potentially community centers that are used for warming facilities during winter storm events. If you have a police department, IT department, those are critical facilities, your city hall. In Waco, for instance, we have a zoo that we do have some critical vulnerable populations that require generator backup power, and animal shelters, things like that, as well as public works and streets and water utilities themselves. Some things that we've done recently at the City of Waco, we've hired an electrical engineer to analyze our existing fleet of generators, and we're looking at adding some additional generators and upsizing to provide more capabilities at some of our facilities. And we use both mobile and stationary generators. We bought a mobile one today, just like TRWA did, and this is from our zoo facility. From a fleet perspective, even what we do in fleet can be an assistance to the water utilities and public works department, because when you get into winter storm events, if you have any heavy equipment that's got hydraulic systems and uses diesel, at certain temperatures that stuff starts to gel up. Your hydraulics take a while to warm up, so having those backup generators at those facilities allows us to keep those facilities warm and the heat going, and keep that equipment ready to go when folks come in and we're responding to winter storm events.
How y'all doing this afternoon? What I have here, I have a Generac 8 kW generator. It's run by a Kubota 3-cylinder diesel engine. I know it's not as big as some of the ones that may be at the wastewater and water plants that y'all are used to seeing, but your basic maintenance is pretty much the same. You know, I like to do kind of a systematic inspection when you inspect the generator. You know, walk around it, make sure there's no anomalies or anything that might seem out of order. You know, check the ground around it, whatever it may be, see if there's any leaks on the ground, because if there's any leaks on the ground, it could be quite possible you may have leaks coming from the generator itself. And then I like to kind of go systematically. On this particular generator, you have your air filter up top. It's very important to check those air filters, make sure they're clean. Once you check that they're clean, go ahead and move across the engine. You got your radiator hoses, rubber hoses, especially in this Texas heat and the heat of the actual generator itself, they will deteriorate, you know, quite quickly. So you want to check those, make sure there's no deterioration, cracks, or anything of that nature. Go ahead and move down to your belt right here. Check your belt for the same thing, make sure it's not deteriorated. If you can, flip it over, check for any big cracks where it could break, could possibly break. Then of course, before you start any piece of equipment, or if it's on some type of scheduled startup or a remote startup, you should have some type of scheduled plan to where you check the oil. You always want to make sure your oil's in good shape and it's at the proper level, obviously before starting any engine. Coolant level as well. Make sure your coolant level's topped up. All that should be on some type of daily, weekly, monthly, you know, quarterly scheduled maintenance program. Most batteries nowadays are maintenance free. It's not like the old batteries you had to pull the caps off and check the water. There are still some of those out there, but they're few and far in between. So biggest thing on batteries nowadays is make sure your terminals are tight and that they're clean. So there's no corrosion on there, so that when the generator does need to fire up, it has the ability to do that. It has the power to fire up from the generator. Other than that, while you're running the generator, you might want to check it out, make sure there's no leaks while it's running. I mean, just because it's not leaking while it's sitting here, don't mean once it gets to operating temperature or up to pressure that you could actually have a leak. So you might want to check it out while it's actually running. And then of course, once the generator is not running anymore, if it shuts down, maybe do a little after check too, just to go back and check for leaks or anything that may have happened while it was running. And other than that, that's just basic, simple, you know, generator maintenance, mostly on the engine side. I'm sure most y'all's generators are on some type of a PM schedule, preventive maintenance schedule, where they get looked at. We look at ours pretty much quarterly for some of our bigger ones. The smaller ones are on an hourly schedule depending upon what OEM requirements are.
Something else we do at the at Fleet Services as far as generators goes that we deal with, we do try to keep spare parts on hand, backup batteries, backup belts, hoses, things like that, so that when we do get into a emergency event like a winter storm or something else, we've got some spare parts to go get, and our fleet team can generally handle all the mechanical side of the engine. Now, when you get on the generator side, you probably need some specialized training, things like that, but generally speaking, we can handle most of the mechanical system issues on the engine side. Y'all have any questions?
Do you have any kind of a template checklist to work off of for anything that you mentioned here?
We normally use OEM. Most of your manufacturers will come with a manual, and it will tell you what to check and at what intervals to check it, whether it be monthly, hourly, whatever the case may be. What I went over was basically the basic checks that's going to be in any maintenance schedule. So, but otherwise, it's in your OEM manual for the most part.
TRWA has 7 generators similar to this. We have 3 65 kW, 4 100s, and then a 15 kW, which I just ironically have in the back of the truck with a VFD. We do emergency response. So whenever we're called out, we ship these all around, typically in the coastal area, but we've been called to hurricanes, fires, floods, things like that. We use the little small one in here with the VFD because we transfer single phase power from the generator to 3-phase. So we get to run smaller applications or even larger applications, but at maybe just a percentage of the actual run. So at least we get some things moving, specifically for lift stations. That's what we get called for the most, and we don't want to oversize by using something like this, which we try to save for water. We'll try to use more of the small applications. On our generators, I was asked to go over like getting it going, get it online, and then also a little bit of maintenance things, which I'll touch on, but I don't want to overlap or repeat the same things. So just kicking things off as far as startup. A few things to consider. First off is sizing. We often get called to say, in a panic moment, I need a generator. Well, we need more information than that. Typically, it's around, for every 1 mechanical horsepower, about 0.75 kilowatts. That's just a roundabout, but that's just for the motor itself. You have a lot of other applications, the lights, chemical feeds, all other kind of things that go involved with it. So it's best to get an electrician or engineer to kind of give you a roundabout, what do you need for your facility, so we can get the right application there. So sizing is important. The voltage, we have on a couple of occasions showed up and they were very adamant. They said it was 480, so we applied 480. We turned it on, and you could look across the field in this wastewater system and see smoke coming from each one of the pumps. It in fact was a 240, so we doubled the juice to it. That is one thing you don't want to do. You want to know your voltage, because not only, it was just down because you didn't have power. Now you're down because none of your applications work. A lot larger issue. So sizing and voltage. I did print off a few. I kind of robbed them from different O&M manuals. It's a basic checklist to getting started. I also have a couple examples of just maintenance checks, but for as it runs. I saw that there was a book in the back of that book that was given to y'all at the beginning. They have a lot of good like weekly, monthly checklists. This is just an additional one. If you don't have a template already, you can use, but as the machine is running. So this is what we use typically whenever we loan one out. It has an hour marker of what needs to be checked. We have a spot in the bottom of who's actually signing off that they did this. So a lot of your basic checks for your monthly, quarterly, annual, as it was mentioned, you can find those in the owner's manual, which if you don't have one, I suggest finding it. I couldn't find one for this machine. We searched online. You can find anything online. Even things you don't want to see online, you can find online. So you can find your manuals, and I would suggest going by this because this particular machine has a set procedures that they prefer you do, set maintenance that they prefer you do. So definitely go by that. There's a little bit of a difference between ones that have ATS or automatic transfer switches, which is typically a fixed generator, or a mobile generator. So fixed, it's typically already planned out of what the application is going to be running. It's nice and smooth, and I wish that was the case for every situation because it just comes on automatically. But even with those, there's still certain things to check. Starting off, just making sure everything is clear of debris. Birds, squirrels, varmints, critters, everything gets in here around Texas. Getting in front of that fan or anything that could be sucked into that engine could definitely damage this. So just as it was mentioned, a visual inspection throughout is good. Obviously checking fluids, oil, water, diesel, that's a big one. For a mobile unit, since it's not going to be an automatic switch, when you're checking on getting it started, before you kick everything off, you want to make sure all panels are off. Your breaker box is off. All the control power is completely off. Before you connect to the application, you want to check to make sure that the incoming power is in fact off. That there is a separation. If you don't have a disconnect switch, that there is a separation between the grid feed and yours. There's been too many cases to where people will hook up a generator directly into the panel box, but it still is connected through the meter to backfeed into the lines. And that's potential hazards, of course, for people working on the lines down the road. There's been a situation that we witnessed to where it actually popped a generator or a transformer because we were feeding back and there was still a stick or a limb or something on a line. It popped something down the road because we were applying power. I say we, utility was. So checking that first, going through to make sure all the applications are off. Typically when the power goes off, things were running. That means they're still being called for. So whether you have Turner controls or pressure switches or whatever it is to call for those pumps, it's better to start with a blank application. As soon as you turn the power on, everything doesn't kick on at once. So making sure everything is off. Once you get connected in, part of the EPP, the requirement for mobile units now is that you have a quick connects, I believe is what it's called. So you'll either see the big Canon plugs that have 5 individual plugs you plug into the box, or you'll see items like this. The newer generators have something more of this type of setup, where they're individual, color-coded. It kind of makes it easy for people like me that aren't all that sharp. All I gotta do is match colors. So this is an easy way to do this. Once it's all connected, this particular generator is not like that. This is an older unit, and I had this open. But they don't like you opening these things because there's a safety switch in here. Nothing will come on if this panel is open. For this particular one, we have a couple sets of wires in here. We have pigtails that we have to connect manually, run through the bottom. Then we have 50-foot cables that connect to those, and another set of pigtails that actually go to the utility. 3 leads, ground and neutral. I left this on here. We let someone borrow it before, and they only had 4 leads. So they jumped them. I would not suggest doing that unless you're an electrician and you know what you're doing. But I haven't taken that off just for this case. I wanted to show that sometimes you run into situations where you create your own power to some extent. So all connected, you apply the power here, you turn your control box on so your panel actually works, leaving the breaker box off, let it run for a little bit, let it stabilize. You typically check your panels to make sure your voltage is correct. Before you even get going on that, there's a switch in the back on most of them that have a voltage indicator. So we can do 280, 480, 240, 277. There's various modes and modules. This can do single phase and 3-phase. Before getting this going, make sure it's set to the correct voltage that you're going for. Operations, run, taking it back down is basically just in the opposite. So that's the general process of getting connected and going. Anyone else that has generators, correct me if I left something out. Okay.
Don't start to, don't change the voltage with the generator running.
Yes. All your settings need to be adjusted prior. Thank you. For general maintenance items, the only thing I can really add, we've had a lot of experience with tires. We change these, whether they look like they need it or not, every 2 years. The way they sit right now, we have them that our utilities manage these for us. We have 7 different member utilities that keep them stored inside now. But prior to that, they would be sitting outside, sun damage, they dry rot. So the tires are lasting a little bit longer, but we've had too many occasions to where they look great. And then now we're taking it from here to the coast, and about halfway there, we blow 2 or 3 tires just in that process. So now we take no chances. For your utilities, you're probably going from one side of town to the next. It's not quite the same thing, but tires are typically overlooked for that reason. Out of sight, out of mind, they're inflated, there's no flats, you're good to go. They dry rot. If you do move it in far distances, you move your generator around, I suggest actually putting it on blocks, getting the pressure off the tires. Even those RV covers that cover the tires up to keep it from sun damage, it's worth it. There's nothing like going to an emergency where you actually need this and you can't get there because there's no wheels. We've had issues with making sure this actually is functional. Your hitch, checking your emergency brake every now and then, pull it, make sure it actually locks, then release. Hitches on your vehicle. We've gotten to a place before, after 4 or 5 hours of driving, where this was split almost completely. We were hanging on by a little bit. I don't know what was damaged on it, but ensuring that whenever you're connecting that everything is in safe operations before you go. Anything outside of just the basics, I do suggest getting a maintenance contractor to some sort. We actually use WPI. I only mentioned them because they were here this morning, but they do all of our services on an annual basis. Service includes actually putting it under a load. Most people will run their generators once a month. That's kind of a standard thing, but they never will put it under a load. So as long as the engine runs, they assume it works. In Uri, in hurricanes, in so many cases, we show up because they have a generator, but the actual power generation portion does not function, and they haven't actually put it under a load in years. So, and that's usually because they can start it up anywhere, but they don't want to have to drag this over to a well site, connect it to a well, do all of that legwork just to put it under a load, just to test it. It's definitely worth it. Just because the engine runs does not mean it actually puts out power. So, generator maintenance people, or unless you do it yourself, you can buy those suitcase load banks. Putting it under a load once a month while it runs, definitely preferred. Make sure it does function.